weakness, my fear, and my hopelessness died on that day, and I became stronger than before.
The night deepened, stars emerging one by one above the city, their faint lights stretching over the land. The hall had grown quieter now. Even the guards at the door seemed transfixed, as though Malala's words had reached beyond the walls and pierced into the marrow of those listening. Ibrahim Traoré stood, still reflecting, his arms at his side, his gaze locked in the shadows dancing from the oil lamps. Malala remained where she was, her hands folded gently in front of her, waiting as though patience itself had taken form in her presence. At last, Ibrahim spoke. His voice was softer, as if he no longer spoke as a soldier, but as a man stripped bare of his defenses. "You make me think of my childhood," he said. "Before politics, before battles. My mother's voice at dawn, when she recited the Quran. I used to hear it not as rules, but as a kind of music. Even when we had nothing, her voice gave me peace. Perhaps that was the first time I felt Islam. But later, when I saw men exploit religion for power, I told myself faith was only a tool, no different than guns or flags. Maybe I've been wrong." Malala stepped closer, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lamps. "Faith is not the tool, Ibrahim. People are the ones who twist it. The Quran says that God is nearer to us than our jugular vein. How can power or greed or cruelty touch something so close, so intimate? It only becomes corrupted when we forget that closeness, when we treat God like a distant ruler instead of the one who shaped our very being." The words pressed deep into Ibrahim's mind. He turned slightly, looking toward the rows of soldiers and advisors behind him. Some shifted in their seats, some bowed their heads. It was as if each man was fighting a private storm within, confronted with truths they had avoided. Ibrahim exhaled slowly, then turned back to Malala. "You speak of God as though he is not far, not unreachable," he said. "Yet so many of my people feel abandoned. They see poverty. They see death. They see the arrogance of nations who claim to control destiny. They ask, where is God in this? What do I tell them?" Malala's eyes softened, filled with both sorrow and conviction. "You tell them that God has not abandoned them. That oppression is not proof of his absence, but a test of our response. The Quran says, indeed, with hardship comes ease. Not after, not later, but with it. The seed of ease is already inside the hardship. When a people suffer, they have two choices, despair or remembrance. If they despair, the tyrants win. If they remember, if they hold tight to faith, then even poverty becomes strength, because it teaches them to rely on God, not on the oppressor. Tell them Islam is not a promise of no suffering. It is the promise that suffering does not define them." Her words struck Ibrahim like a spear wrapped in velvet, sharp yet comforting. He thought of the villages he had visited, the children barefoot in the dust, the women carrying water for miles, the elders who still smiled despite hunger. He had always told himself it was resilience, but now he saw it differently. Perhaps it was faith, quietly holding them upright when the world tried to push them down. "You have courage," he said, his tone almost reverent. "You speak with no fear, though you have faced death. Do you not sometimes doubt? Do you not ask yourself why God allowed you to be shot?" Malala closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed clarity. "I asked, yes. I lay in that hospital bed and wondered, why me? But then I realized something. The bullet was not the end. It was a beginning. It was as though God whispered to me, you will not be silenced. Your voice will carry farther than it ever could if you had lived quietly." I understood then that even my pain was a gift, a way to awaken not only myself but the world. Islam taught me to see beyond the wound, to see the wisdom hidden inside what seems like tragedy. When I understood that, doubt turned into gratitude. The hall was still. Even the crickets outside seemed to pause. Ibrahim's chest tightened as he listened. He had lost comrades, brothers in arms, people who believed in his struggle. He had buried them with anger in his heart, asking why God had allowed it. But hearing Malala, he realized perhaps he had been blind. Perhaps their sacrifice, their blood in the soil, was not in vain, but part of a larger unfolding, a reminder that justice demanded not only weapons, but faith. "You speak as though Islam is endless hope," he said. "But what of punishment, Of fear, of the fire we are warned of? Malala's expression grew grave, but not harsh. Fear has its place, Ibrahim. It keeps us awake. It reminds us of accountability. But Islam is balanced. Hope and fear walk hand in hand. If all we see is fire, then faith becomes despair. If all we see is paradise, then faith becomes arrogance. The truth is in between. Fear keeps us humble. Hope keeps us moving. The Quran speaks of God's mercy far more than his wrath. Mercy is the foundation. Even the Prophet, peace be upon him, was sent as a mercy to the worlds. That is the Islam I live, the Islam that carried me through my darkest night. The words echoed through Ibrahim's bones. Mercy. That word alone seemed to shift something deep inside him. His struggle had always been clothed in hardness. Bullets, speeches, defiance. But mercy? That was a weapon he had not considered. Yet perhaps it was the most powerful of all. He moved closer now, his eyes fixed on Malala. And you believe Islam can free nations? Not just souls. Malala's reply came without hesitation. Yes, because when people see themselves as servants of God, not servants of men, no empire can enslave them. Islam is not chains, it is wings. It teaches us to bow only to God, and in bowing only to him, we stand upright before everyone else. If Africa, if Asia, if all the oppressed carried this in their hearts, then even poverty would not break them. They would rise, because their dignity would be unshakable. That is the freedom Islam offers. Not freedom without struggle, but freedom even in struggle. Ibrahim felt his breath catch. He looked down at his hands, callous from years of labor and war, and for the first time he wondered if strength alone had blinded him. He had spoken often of revolution, but Malala was painting revolution in a new light. Not with fire and gunpowder, but with remembrance, with justice, with mercy. Could such a revolution truly change his people more than guns ever could? He lifted his gaze, his voice breaking the silence. You make Islam sound like both sword and shield, both fire and water. If that is true, then perhaps I have been carrying only half the truth. Tell me, Malala, what must a leader do to walk this path? She looked at him, her face calm, her words deliberate. A leader must be the first servant. To serve God and to serve the people is trust. Islam teaches that leadership is a mana, a trust, not power, not privilege, but responsibility. If you rule with justice, you worship. If you betray justice, you betray God. A leader must not see himself above the people, but among them, praying with them, suffering with them, standing with them. That is how the Prophet led. That is why his followers loved him more than life itself. If you walk in that shadow, Ibrahim, then your nation will walk in light. For a long time, Ibrahim said nothing. His eyes shimmered with something rare, something only those closest to him had ever seen: vulnerability. The evening air carried a quiet heaviness as the great hall in Ouagadougou dimmed into silence. The sun had dipped beyond the horizon, leaving behind a faint glow that mingled with the murmurs of waiting men and women. Ibrahim Traoré, the young Burkinabe leader, sat still in his chair, eyes focused on the polished wooden table before him. He had hosted many voices from across the world, some eager to praise, others ready to challenge. But that night was different. That night, Malala Yousafzai stood across from him, her calm presence radiating both gentleness and an unshakable fire. She had arrived not as a politician nor as a celebrity, but as a seeker, someone who had seen the raw face of violence in the name of faith, and yet refused to abandon her belief in its beauty. Her journey had carried her from the valleys of Pakistan to the corridors of power in the West, and now to the very heart of Africa, where a new leader wrestled with the meaning of justice, sovereignty, and spiritual strength. Ibrahim, Malala began softly, her voice as steady as a stone resting in the riverbed. I have watched you speak about dignity and about the right of people to live without chains. But tell me, when you speak of freedom, do you also think of freedom of the soul? Her question hung in the air. Traoré, known for his sharp wit and unflinching tone, leaned back and crossed his arms. The soul? He repeated. I think of liberation from poverty, from imperialism, from hunger. Those are chains I can see. The soul belongs to the imams, to preachers. Malala's eyes gleamed. And yet, What drives the courage to stand against guns, against bombs, against the power of empires? What breathes strength into a man when his body trembles? It is not bread. It is not gold. It is faith, an unseen flame. For the first time, Traoré did not answer immediately. He studied her carefully, as if weighing whether her words carried truth or mere idealism. He had risen to power in storms, surrounded by weapons and threats. The soil of his country was stained with the sweat of farmers and the blood of martyrs. To him, faith was a private matter, whispered in prayer mats at dawn. But here stood Malala, insisting that faith was not the background but the foundation. "You speak as if Islam itself is the liberator," he said finally. Malala smiled, not triumphantly but knowingly, as one who had wrestled with doubt, yet emerged intact. "Because it is," she replied. But not the Islam of slogans, not the Islam twisted by politics or by those who hide their cruelty behind verses. "I speak of the Islam that begins in the heart, that tells a person he is not small before the world, that his life is honored by the Creator, that no tyrant can own him. That is why they tried to silence me with bullets. Not because I asked for schools, but because I reminded them that seeking knowledge is worship." The hall seemed to tighten around her words. Traoré's advisors shifted uneasily. Some lowered their eyes. Others leaned forward with intent curiosity. The young leader himself uncrossed his arms, his fingers now drumming softly on the table. "You faced death," he said. "You lost blood, and yet you still call the faith merciful? How do you reconcile the violence done to you in its name?" Malala's face grew solemn. She took a slow breath, and for a moment her eyes seemed to return to that school bus in SWAT, the cold barrel of a gun, the crack of a shot. But when she spoke, her voice was stronger, like a river pushing through stone. "Men wounded me," she said, "men who feared the light of knowledge. They used the name of God, but their hearts were chained to power. Do you blame the sun because someone blinds you with its reflection in a mirror? Do you curse water because a tyrant drowns a prisoner in it? No, Ibrahim. Islam was not the bullet. Islam was the shield that told me to rise after it pierced me. Islam was my mother's whispered prayers beside my hospital bed, the courage that carried me across oceans, the voice that refuses to be silenced even today." Traoré's eyes narrowed, but not in skepticism. Rather, it was the look of a soldier confronted with a truth he had always skirted. He knew bullets. He knew betrayal. He knew the machinery of oppression. But he had not thought of Islam as a living current, a lifeline that turned wounds into testimony. Malala stepped closer to the table. Her voice softened, drawing him in as if she spoke only to him. "Do you know what Islam tells us about justice, Ibrahim? That to stand with the oppressed is worship. That to speak truth against power is jihad greater than the sword. You speak of liberating your people. But liberation is not only the removal of chains. It is the awakening of the heart to its creator. When people remember who they are in the sight of God, no empire can bend them." The silence in the hall thickened. One of Traoré's generals shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsettled by the direction of the conversation. But Ibrahim lifted a hand, silencing any interruption. His eyes had locked on Malala, his thoughts moving like storms behind them. "You speak of jihad," he said, "a word the world fears." "Yes," Malala said firmly, "because the world has been taught to fear it. They show them only the fire, never the water. They teach them that jihad is blood and blade. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, said the greatest jihad is against the self, against arrogance, against greed, against despair. Tell me, Ibrahim, what empire could defeat a man who conquers his own fear? What army can chain a people who see their service to God as their highest freedom?" A spark ignited in Traoré's gaze. He leaned forward, his voice lower, almost hushed. "You say Islam is liberation itself. Then why do so many Muslims still bow to foreign powers, still sell their nations for scraps?" Malala did not flinch. "Because they forgot," she said simply. "They forgot the Quran is not just for the tongue, but for the soul, the family, the society. They recite it, but do not live it. And so they are weak. The true revolution is not in guns or slogans. It is in returning to the book with open eyes, in treating knowledge as sacred, in treating the poor as family, in treating women as equals before God. When a people live this Islam, the world itself shifts. The words fell heavy, yet they shimmered with a hope too sharp to ignore. Traoré felt something stir in his chest, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years, the possibility that faith was not a chain of dogma, but a fire of freedom. He thought of his own mother, whispering du'a under her breath as she prepared meals during his childhood. He thought of the Quran recitations that echoed through his village at night, not as rules but as songs. He thought of the way his people still, despite poverty, held on to dignity, sharing what little they had with neighbors. Perhaps Malala was right. Perhaps that spirit was Islam itself, still alive, still undefeated. Malala's voice broke into his thoughts. You, Ibrahim, have been given a trust. You carry not just a nation, but an example. If you lead with Islam and its truth, not as a mask, not as a slogan, but as mercy and justice, then Africa will see, the world will see, what it means to be truly free. Her words echoed like a call to prayer, reverberating beyond the walls of the hall. Outside, the crickets sang. The wind stirred the trees, and somewhere distant, the voices of children carried faintly in laughter. For a long time, Ibrahim said nothing. Then, slowly he rose from his seat. The room tensed as though